Hi, this is Sean D'Souza, and you're listening to the 3-Month Vacation Podcast. This podcast isn't some magic trick about how to work less. Instead, it's about how to really enjoy the work that you do and to enjoy your vacation time. Hi, it's me, Sean, and you're listening to the 3-Month Vacation. If you were Alexander the Great, how many cities would you name after yourself? As he worked his way through his conquering spree, Alexander the Great conquered Egypt, Judea, Syria, Mesopotamia, Persia, Phoenicia, Anatolia, which is modern Turkey, Bactria, and made his way to India. Often, when he'd conquer the cities, he'd name it after himself. And Alexander named 70 cities after himself and one after his horse. So you had city after city called Alexander, 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 or some variation of Alexander the Great. It's slightly obvious that he didn't feel the need to take the time to create unique names. But as writers, as business owners, we have the somewhat troubling task of having to choose names all the time. If we write a book, we need a name. If we conduct a seminar or give a presentation, again, we need a name. Even if we're doing a little report, again, you're going to need a name. And the question that arises almost immediately is, how do we name our information products? How do we come up with a really catchy title, a catchy book title that we love, and that instantly gets the attention of clients? So let's look at 3 things that we have to do. The first thing that we have to do is not to write the title, to find it. Step 2 is to have a paradox in the title. This is very cool, by the way. And step 3 is to go from writing to explaining. Let's find out all of these 3 things. I'm excited about it, aren't you? Let's go. First one, step 1, don't write the title, find it. If you look through the Psychotactics website, you'll find some pretty interesting book titles and some below average ones. One of the below average book titles is called Black Belt Presentations. For a name to tickle the brain, it needs some oomph. And then you get a name like Black Belt Presentation, and it has none of that oomph, none of that pizzazz. The reason why it's so boring is remarkably simple. I was the author, I wrote the title. But what are you supposed to do as an author? Aren't you supposed to come up with the title? Yes, you are. But as incredible as it sounds, your title is often located elsewhere. You don't get a title by sitting down trying to figure it out. If you pick up a book, if you watch a video, and if you are alert, you're almost going to find a title. Often within a week, but usually within the day itself. Authors write catchy phrases, and they do so without realizing it. Take, for instance, a book I was reading at the cafe one morning. My mind was on an upcoming book, which was on the topic of talent. And within the book I was reading, the line went like this. Yes, but the main thing is that greatness is doable. Greatness is many, many individual feats, and each one of them is doable. Now, if I were writing a book on pricing, that idea of doable greatness would not have stood out for me. As it happened, the term was exactly what I was looking for. And the phrases seemed to pour out of the book. Incremental mastery, the mundanity of excellence, and of course, doable greatness. Without trying too hard, I was able to find a series of phrases, all of which would make catchy book titles. Granted, the author was also quite proficient at her writing, but even under normal conditions, you're going to find yourself running into phrases that can become titles. And if you can't see the title yourself, you'll be amazed at how clients can find it for you. In November 2018, I was headed to speak at an event in Australia. My slides were about the topic of how to acquire talent. At that point, the name of the presentation was The Talent Equation. Along the way, Renuka and I ignored our own advice and we tried to somehow force that title. The result, we ended up with names that were not so great. One of them was called The Talent Muddle. Now, at this point, coincidentally, I sent the slides over to a client, Simon Lamy, and he came back and he told me that he loved slide number 8. What was so special about slide number 8, I wondered. I opened up the slide deck, went to 8, and there it was. It said, suddenly talented. I remember vaguely writing that term, but it was just something that I put on a slide. But for Simon, it was a really cool title, and he told me so, and then I told Renuka, and that's when we knew. We knew we had it. We have to get the domain name, we have to do all of that stuff. But before that, it was just a slog, just a struggle. And there's something similar if you've read the book The Long Tail by Chris Anderson. Same thing happened. He put the name The Long Tail into his slide deck, and it was just one of the slides. And someone came up to him and said, that slide, that's so cool. It's about the long tail and how people will continue buying for years on end. And that became the book. It became its own book. How are you supposed to go about this task of getting this name out from a client or a friend? Maybe you've written a chapter of a book, or you've created a report, or you've got a slide deck. Send it to a friend and ask them to read a small section of that chapter, a small section of their report, and then to send back in a kind of soundbite or a short phrase what resonates with them. And you and I, when we're reading something, we can spot the phrases, we can spot the important bits, we can spot the things that interest us the most. The person writing it, creating it, sometimes they figure it out, but often we're so close to the report, so close to the book, so close to the slides or whatever we're doing that we can't see it. We have this myopia. And that becomes our first kind of strategy to get a name that's really catchy, to either look for it in a book or something that we're reading, or to send our work out and see what comes back. And then we go to step 2. But step 2 is a little different. Once you have a name, how do you know that it's not just a name? How do you know that it's super cool instead? Let's find out in the next part, where we look for the paradox in the title. What is the paradox in the title? You want to know, don't you? Let's find out. Notice the title of the book, Suddenly Talented. Why is that title so interesting? It's not hard to figure out that talent doesn't seem to be something that shows up knocking at your door. Most of us believe talent to either be inborn or something that takes a mind-boggling 10,000 hours to acquire. Sudden talent seems to prod us, to even provoke us, and it's a paradox that's doing all the work. A paradox is a bunch of opposites, two opposites that keep pushing at each other. And when you put these two opposing forces together in a title, your book title goes from good to great. See that? Good to great. Good to great also happens to be the title of a book where good is the enemy of great. And if you really want to see some outstanding titles, head over to a bookshop, or as I did, go to the library. So one lovely rainy Auckland day, I went to the library and looked at random books, random shelves, and there on the shelves of parenting, one book jumped out at me. And the title was Shitty Mom. Then in the cookery section, there was another kind of book that jumped out at me, another title, and it said 3 veg and 1 meat. And when you see these titles, immediately you start to think, oh, I wonder what's in the book. And that's because they have a paradox. Let's take some more titles like Boldly Cautious, or Prosperity Without Growth, or The Mundanity of Excellence, or Slightly Famous. It's the paradox that's doing all the work. You can have a straightforward title like Graphic Design for Business. But as soon as you start putting in something that's slightly paradoxical, slightly opposite, then you get a title like The Non-Designer's Design Book. And if you have them side by side, Graphic Design for Business versus The Non-Designer's Design Book, which one would you pick first? And it's not like every book has this paradox factor, but if you do have this paradox in your title, you will notice that it gets immediate attention. But what about one-word titles? You've seen these one-word titles, haven't you? Books like Outliers, Grit, Positioning. They're all bestsellers. Shouldn't you be choosing one-word titles as well? Now that's your call. But if you choose one word, your subtitle has to do all the explanation. Your subtitle will need to pack enough curiosity so that the reader picks your book off the shelf, or if they're browsing on Amazon, they pick it among all of those other books. If, on the other hand, you have a paradoxical title, as well as a curious subtitle, you've provided your book with the best possible option ever. Once again, you want to look for this kind of title while reading or watching or listening. And yes, using the keen insight of your clients or friends. And sometimes you're in a hurry and it may not come right away. When we were looking for a title for the Talent book, Suddenly Talented took well over a year for us. And you might not have time on your side, in which case we have to use the third and most promising method of all, the explainer method. Let's find out why this explainer method seems to work better than others and how you can go about using that explainer method to your advantage. Houston, Texas. That's where I was when a participant at the sales page workshop tried to write a few lines. It was for a sales page, of course, but these lines that this person was trying to write were very confusing and sounded very stiff. The exercise was done just before lunch, so we went to the lunch break, and as we sat down for a Peruvian meal, someone asked that writer again. They asked her, "What product are you selling?" And what she did next was pure magic. She went from being a writer to an explainer. What is a writer to explainer? It's exactly like it sounds. When you write, you're using some part of your brain, and when you're explaining something, you're using some other part of your brain. At least that's what I think. Writing tends to be rigid at times, and the spoken word has no such boundaries. It can start, it can zig its way across, can zag, zigzag, do whatever it feels like. And usually what happens is the moment we sense confusion on the other side, we decide to use analogies. And this is approximately what happened when I came up with the name The Brain Audit. It wasn't like I sat down at a desk and came up with the name for the book, The Brain Audit. It's more likely that somewhere along the way I was asked, what is this book about? And then I would say something like, oh, it's about a book that audits your brain. It's an audit system. Your brain is going through these steps, these speedy steps, and you have to make a decision. And this system, well, you could call it a brain audit. So there's this zigzag to the method. There's no cohesion, and suddenly, boom, There is the name, The Brain Audit. Let me give you another example. We were in Brussels and I was talking about this course that I wanted to do on advanced storytelling. Now, we already have a series on the Psychotactics website, and it's got a name like storytelling or something like that. And this is advanced storytelling. And of course, you have to come up with a name. Except I couldn't come up with any name at all. So then someone asked me to describe the course. And that was easy because I already had worked out some graphics and drawn some cartoons and slides. I'd done all of that groundwork, and so I was able to explain it. And I told them how a story progresses from suspense to success, and then you have this big problem. It's a bit like traffic lights, I'd say. So you have this red, this orange, and green. And even as I'm explaining it, I realize that's it. That's the name. Traffic light storytelling. And yes, when you hear it at first, you don't know what it means, but that's what a sales page is about. The explainer method is so interesting because it works in this really funny way. And that's how we came up with names like Chaos Planning, The Brain Audit, and maybe future courses like Traffic Light Storytelling. They all came from this need to explain the concept to someone else. And while you're never really sure how that explanation is going to tumble out, you try and you explain as you notice that confusion on the other person's face. What's interesting is that at first you're confused yourself. You're not able to describe it clearly. And then you try it once, twice, thrice, different people, different situations, and it gets clearer, it gets tweaked a little bit more, and that's when you get this explainer method really going. And with that, we come to the end of this podcast. We covered 3 things. What were the 3 things? The first step was don't write the title, find it. Get a client to find it for you. Often this is the easiest method. It's not the most efficient method, but it works quite often, more often than you think it would, but it works. The other way is to open a book or keep your ears and eyes open when you're watching video or listening to audio, because writers and speakers and all of us, we tend to use these little phrases while we're speaking. And we think nothing about it later, but you as the reader, as someone looking for that phrase, for that book title, it's very interesting. And that's how you get a concept like doable greatness. You're not likely to say it, but when you hear it, you know, wow, that's a really cool term, and that would make a great title for a book. So you have a starting point, but step 2 is to make sure that you have a paradox. And that's because a paradox increases the curiosity factor many times over. A paradox where the names almost contradict each other, like Shitty Mom or Suddenly Talented. Now, there will be titles like Traffic Light Storytelling, and they don't fit this model, but they're still curious titles. The goal is for someone to pick up your book, your report, or your course, and the curiosity is what causes them to do that. Step 3 is to step from the writer mode to the explainer mode. And if there's one thing that you can do today, this is what you should be doing. Try and explain your concept to someone else and pay attention to your own words. And yes, it's going to be klutzy to begin with, and maybe the second time, third time, fourth time. After a while, you're going to get quite polished at tweaking it just a little bit, explaining yourself in different ways. And that's when you'll get your title. It'll just pop out of a conversation one day and you have your title. Which means that we've come to the end of this podcast. What's happening in Psychotactics land? Let's find out. 2 of the biggest struggles that we encounter every day is writing and drawing. Now, not everybody wants to draw, but we somehow feel that we weren't born to draw, that everybody else could draw better than we could. And my wife, Renuka, she started out on the cartooning course when we first envisioned this cartooning course, just as okay, well, let's do this thing and see how it goes. And if you see her work on Instagram, and if you see her work on Facebook, there are people that keep saying, hey, Renuka, you should do a book, because they're so enamored by her work. Now, it's not just her work, but if you look at all the work of all the people that have done the cartooning course, there is something that comes out very clearly, and there is disbelief. There is pure disbelief. Even for me, when I look at some of their work, I think, surely these people could have drawn before, but I've seen the before and I've seen the after. And I think that many of us want to be at that after stage where we can draw cartoons and have control over them, and for people to come up to you after 6 months and say, I didn't know you could draw, and then you smile. You give that knowing smile. You don't protest. You don't say, oh, no, I'm just practicing. No. You just smile because you know for a fact that you can draw. If you want to become a cartoonist, go to psychotactics.com/DaVinci. That's DAVINCI, and you'll see the results for yourself. The second is the headline course. Now, we write articles all the time, and you spend so much time writing those articles, maybe a day, 2 days. Well, at the end of it, you've got to write a headline. That's how I do it, at least. I write it at the end of it. And even for this podcast, sometimes in a few seconds, I have to write a headline that's curious, that gets someone to click on the podcast. And how do you do this extremely quickly? Well, this headline course will show you how to write 8 different types of headlines in 10 minutes. Everyone on the course does it. Everyone on the course writes exceedingly good headlines, and you can see it for yourself on the course and after the course. And so that's psychotactics.com/HL. Now, both of these have a waiting list. And if you're a 5000 BC member, which you get by going to 5000bc.com, well, if you're a 5000 BC member, you get first preference. Everybody else needs to be on the waiting list, because once the 25 seats are gone, they're gone. And they go relatively quickly, usually in 24 hours, sometimes less. And that's just because instead of giving you information on a course, we give you specific results. This is what's going to happen at the end of this course. And you can find all of this information on the sales page itself. You will get a result. You become a headline writing expert. You become a cartoonist, period. And that's it from me and from Psychotactics Land. Now go out there and write a catchy title for your book. Actually, read it, or better still, explain it. Bye for now. Still listening? I look around for books with strange names, interesting names. And probably the most interesting name I've ever seen is this one, which is called The Absolutely Critical Non-Essentials. I'll say bye for now, and we'll see you in 5000 BC.